Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. Today we're doing another open Q&A. We're working our way through the Rings of Power. We've reached episode 7 now, but this isn't just about the Rings of Power. We'll take questions on the Rings of Power first, and then later on we'll go wider Lord of the Rings questions and anything else on A Song of Ice and Fire or whatever you want to talk about. I've asked, as I said last time, I've asked my patrons, if you're a $10 plus patron, please do go and check out Patreon, what we should be covering. Once the Rings of Power is finished, what should we be covering going forward? I've given a few sort of broad ideas of where we might be going. So far, people seem to be liking the idea of chapter by chapter breakdowns, but let me know if that's the kind of thing you're interested in, and we will figure it all out in about 2 weeks. But for now, what we are doing is we are first of all looking at the Rings of Power episode 7, which happened, and I will be taking questions as always from my patrons and also as many as I can from the chat as we are going through. So first up, we've got Rassler saying the trailer for the next episode seems to imply the theory that they are indeed moving up Durin's Bane from the Third Age to now. But this raises a massive question. The dwarves have yet to distribute the dwarven rings, so if the dwarves flee Khazad-dûm, would they really take the rings with them after what they've done? The more likely thing would be that they would be left behind. So how will the other lords receive their rings? Or will they set up an alliance with Sauron, receiving them from Durin's Bane himself? Okay, so I have to say I broadly agree. I've thought for a while that what is likely to happen with the plot lines that they don't have much going forward, by which I mean the dwarves in Tolkien's timeline, they did get engaged around the time of the sack of Eregion. They sent an army out to get engaged with that, but then they retreated back. They closed the doors to Khazad-dûm, and that's largely all we see of them for a while. Sauron cut off their supply lines from elsewhere, and they just stayed where they were in Khazad-dûm for the next few thousand years, just digging deeper. So I suspect that they will be thinking, well, what do we do now? The dwarf storyline in Tolkien has finished, but they clearly like those dwarf characters, so they will clearly carry on doing dwarf storylines. I think instinctively, although they have clearly introduced the Balrog, and the Balrog is clearly a big part of this, I suspect they are probably going to leave the end bit of that story until the end of the season. But I suspect that they are bringing it forward from the Third Age into the Second Age. I suspect that's what they're doing with the other storyline, that there's not really much that Tolkien wrote about it, which is the Harfoots and, can we call him Gandalf yet? I'm not 100% sure. The Stranger. And that still hasn't tied in with the main storyline. The hints, I think, are that they're going to be bringing them back, and they're going to be founding the Shire at the end of the show, which shouldn't happen until the Third Age. But I have a feeling that these two areas, these two storylines, they're just going to fast track, and they're just going to say, well, this is what happens at the end of our story, at the end of the way that we're telling this tale. So that's my instinct, is that they will do Durin's Bane, but they're probably going to leave it for a while. So I don't know where they're going to go in the next episode and next season, but I think they'll probably park that for a bit. They'll leave the Balrog there as this kind of threat in the background that at some point is going to kick all of the dwarves out. But that means that the distribution of the 7 dwarf rings can carry on. At the moment, it looks like the dwarves are going to do it rather than Sauron himself, which would be, again, another departure and raise a whole load of other issues there. But I don't think we're looking right now at this episode, next episode, even the beginning of next season, Durin's Bane happening and kicking the dwarves out of Khazad-dûm. The Hermit, welcome to channel membership. Thank you so much. If you are wishing to support this channel, the best way is still over on Patreon. There are links down in the description and things. But if you don't want to go to Patreon for whatever reason, then a channel membership here is incredibly generous as well. So thank you so much. And Maura, hi there, Maura. Great to see you. Saying just a show of love and support. Thank you for the stories, merch, and content. Love to Dan. You are the best. Hugs to Dan, the handsome dog. Absolutely, yeah. He's gone up to bed, as he often does at this point. So, particularly as the nights are starting to draw in, he's quite a big fan of getting up to bed. So, Rasla. I really enjoyed this last episode, but the way the battles are shot made it very difficult to understand or gauge numbers. The elves are seen to have a massive cavalry, but in the next shot are fighting in little sorties as opposed to mounting a massive charge. I assume it's a limitation of TV, but we really have no scale, and the tactics shown make little sense because of the confusion of a tracking shot. Perhaps they should have shown something to give us scale. What are your thoughts on the overall battle? Well, my general feeling on that episode in terms of the battle is I don't think they were trying to show us a great tactical fight. If the elves had wished to maximize their advantage, then when they had been charging, then they'd have just carried on with the charge. I think that the fact they all kind of screeched to a halt when Galadriel there took away their advantage. The way I think that they were trying to show this was that Elrond, as he was trying to head out from the orc camp, got ambushed. Hello, I am back. I don't know where I was when when I went down, so apologies for that. Um, I was in the middle of when I noticed. I was in the middle of trying to explain the elf tactics in that battle, which uh, weren't particularly effective. Let's put it that way. So I'm not entirely sure. I'll just quickly flick. 100k saying IDG is the master of stream resurrection. I don't know what's going. I wouldn't quite say that, but thank you very much. I'm not entirely sure where we got up to. Let's just assume I gave a flowing and eloquent justification for the elf battle tactics there. And then we'll move on to and Rassler. I hope that worked for you. Georgia R. Tolkien saying, "Salutations, Robert. I was wondering if you were lucky enough to catch the last 2 episodes of the Rings of Power Season 2 premiere in theatres." I was not. No, Amazon have not been in contact with me there. I did see some very fine people were there, but I was not. Maura Lee, Tom Bombadil is encouraging the stranger to choose his path, either to find his gan or staff, or go save his friends, much like Luke Skywalker was made to choose during the movie The Empire Strikes Back. Now, Luke was able to eventually do both and ended up a powerful Jedi Knight. Do you see a similar turn of events for the stranger? What do you see Tom Bombadil's role moving forward? And do you think we've seen the last of him for this season? So, I'll say again what I said before. Yes, this is Tom Bombadil, but this is show Tom Bombadil. This isn't Tolkien's version of Tom Bombadil. So we should probably try and avoid using that as a basis for trying to understand why he's doing what he's doing. What has happened here is he is clearly trying to guide Gandalf towards the path that Tom Bombadil wants him to be going down. Now, I think it's very right, insightful that this is pretty much exactly the Empire Strikes Back plotline. Tom Bombadil here on the show is basically Middle-earth Yoda. And what he's doing is he's saying, your friends are in trouble over there, but I'm telling you to get power is over here. What are you going to choose? And I think we all know Gandalf is going off and choosing to save his friends. So that's clearly the right choice. And I suspect that this will all tie in nicely towards the end, and we'll see, oh, right, this shows us that the stranger is doing the thing he ought to be doing. So whether this is the last we see of Tom Bombadil, I do not know. If he is being Middle-earth Yoda, then we might expect him to be providing a little bit more advice and guidance into next season, or otherwise we've got the stranger there out in the middle of a room, not really knowing what he's doing or where he's going or why. So I suspect we'll probably see a little bit more of Tom Bombadil. Quick flick into the chat. Kaziglu Bay saying it was solid, cohesive, well paced, full of action, and the troll fight was intense. And just in terms of the sort of episode breakdown, Pedro Enrique saying, I have to say, I like the Harfoots, but the Gandalf story feels really disconnected. The Dark Wizard, which was an interesting addition, didn't really do anything. And April May saying, Tom Bombadil is the best psycho ever. Okay. And then Vice Games saying, thanks for all the content. A Song of Ice and Fire question for later. If you put predictions aside, what are your hopes for Rickon and Shaggy Dog in the story going forward? Well, remind me when we get onto that one. But I'm not that hopeful. Sword of the Morning, why could the dwarves not send any of their troops? I think the implication is that Durin Jr. has decided that he needs them, and he's prioritized Khazad-dûm over Elrond, and that's why Elrond was looking so aghast. That seems to me to be the implication of that one. Rassler, the line of Durin continues to wear the ring right up to Thrain II. However, the way the show has portrayed the Dwarven Ring and its corruptions, it doesn't seem like this would be possible. Are they retconning this particular point? I don't know whether retconning is the right way of saying it, but yeah, we mentioned, I think, last time how quickly in this version here the ring is corrupting Durin Senior. Which this isn't really the way that Tolkien established the way that the dwarves interact with the rings. They had a lot more resistance to it, to put it at a very basic level, but it did indeed make them greedier, or the wearer of the ring greedier and mine and dig deeper, but not in a matter of a couple of scenes moving to be an unrecognizable person. Tolkien was very clear that the dwarves had a much stronger resistance to it than that. So is this retconning it? I don't know. As I say, this is setting up a different timeline. This is show canon rather than Tolkien canon. What will be interesting to see is how, having established the fact that this ring of power has such a huge impact on whoever wears it, how are you then going to show what happens with Durin Senior has been wearing it, and how long is he going to be able to carry on as he is? Then at some point, presumably Durin Junior is going to get it. What about the other dwarf lords? Are they going to be getting their dwarven rings? Are they going to be impacted quite so quickly, quite so strongly? If so, this changes all of the timeline, and actually probably the way that, if they're going to use your word, retcon all of this, this will just speed it up, and they'll say, so the dwarves don't have this special resistance to these rings. It does affect them hugely, and as a result, that's why they might bring the whole Durin's Bane getting kicked out of Moria, that storyline brought forward hugely. I can't really see any other way around that. If you're saying that this ring has that much power and control over what otherwise seemed quite a strong-minded dwarf, then I think you have to say that this speeds it all up. So the timelines, I think we should probably just not worry about them too much. Already we've had, and we knew this was the case, and I'm quite sympathetic. I said this from the start. I understood why they streamlined 2,500 years down into just a matter of a few years. It did have huge implications. This is just one of these, as George R. R. Martin might call them, toxic butterflies. Commando Ray, member for 10 months. Well, thank you very much. If Dan got the run, this is my dog Dan, if Dan got the One Ring, would he become the Bark Lord? Thanks for all the great streams and videos, and thanks for the amazing mods. Well, he's a greyhound, and greyhounds don't bark that much. I wish I could think of a pun to do with how fast he can run. But I'll leave that for the chat. If the chat can come up with some pun to do with being really quite a fast runner, then I would hugely appreciate that. I'll pop back and have a look in a moment. Question from Commander Ray. Hello, Robert and Dan, and the rest of the good people in the stream. I love the Orc army of Adar being a bit scrappy, undisciplined, and poorly led, but I don't like how this light infantry force has been able to withstand the might of heavy elvish cavalry, equipped with the best arms and armor, and immortal elves with thousands of years of training being beaten by aforementioned orcs. What are your thoughts on how they handled the battle, which visually was amazing, and your thoughts on how it ends? Okay. I mean, I think the first thing to say is, yes, visually, I think it looked really good. I enjoyed it a lot. I enjoyed the hill troll. I think that the whole thing, it felt visually pleasing to me. So well done to the team for that. In terms of how this worked with the Elvish army against the orcs, well, as I covered, I think if we're going to, and maybe this was when the stream went down, but my take was what they were trying to show was that the orcs actually, perhaps rather cleverly, tried to eliminate the advantage of the elves, which is the elves' advantage was they were on horses, they had the cavalry, they had the lances out. This would have been a massive victory if they just managed to charge into the orc army, but then Ta-da, here's Galadriel. They managed to get rid of that, so the charge did not happen. And then when Elrond was on his way out, they kind of ambushed him. The other elves, while in the forest, the other elves came into the forest and they attacked them, and this got rid of the advantage that the elves would have had in open ground. At which point, then Elrond's plan, once they'd kind of recovered from that a little bit, Elrond's plan appeared to be to place his forces between the orcs and the city walls in the riverbed. And that, we saw the shot, the horses got bogged down quite literally in the muddy ground, and that eliminated any advantage they had there. Now, that strikes me as being a combination of the orcs cleverly trying to eliminate the advantage that the elves had, and also the elves eliminating their own advantage by going and standing between a big wall and an army in quite boggy ground where they couldn't use their horses. So a bit of both. I don't know whether they were trying to show that the elves weren't being very clever in their tactics. They certainly didn't show us any particularly clever tactics on their part. They seem to show Adar. I think they would try to show with him doing the catapults against the canyon wall and damming the river. That seemed to be trying to show that he was a clever commander and he could figure stuff out. They didn't really show that the elves did anything particularly clever. So does this fit with my idea of how orcs and elves are? Well, Adar, they presented him as being a corrupted elf, basically, and therefore many millennia of experience himself, and also quite clever. So that's fine. The elves themselves, I perhaps was hoping for a bit more. Hermione saying, I loved the troll, especially the accompanying soundtrack. Yes, absolutely loved that. Any chance to be having another chat with Bear McCreary? Yeah, I will get in contact with him. I had a couple of fantastic chats with him in season 1. And I just want, I mean, doesn't come from me talking to him, but just in case you missed it, there was that wonderful moment when Sauron was there in Eregion and he was kind of like, his hands were coming up like that and he was clearly performing some huge magic. And if you could feel, the music was just this kind of like slightly weird cacophony slowly coming into tune. And what that was that they recorded, whenever they were doing the orchestra, it takes many days to be recording the music for an entire season. Whenever at the beginning of the day the orchestra as a whole was just tuning up, they recorded that and then they kind of pushed it together to get this impression of like all of these discordant notes slowly coming together to form something, which I thought was fantastic. So yeah, I will have a word with him and see whether we can talk to him at all about the music this season. John Majesham's in the chat. Hi there, Joe. Great to see you, Matt. Great to see you there. We're talking about the Rings of Power at the moment. We will move on to other things, I'm sure, a little bit later. Andrew Kay saying not the highest bar, but would you say the best episode of the season so far? Felt like the Harfoots and Stranger Emissions helped quite a bit as well. Yeah, I thought it was a good episode. Yeah, maybe the best. There was one, maybe a couple of episodes. I can't remember which episode it was. Maybe 5, when Anatos starts with the really kind of manipulating Celebrimbor. That episode I really quite enjoyed as well. But yeah, I thought this was a good episode. Pedro Enrique saying, I'm quite invested in the show, but they cannot really make me feel for Galadriel. She's always so bland and disconnected to the scenes. Agreed. Weirwood saying that was a fast-flowing river. The small amount of rocks placed wouldn't last that long as a barrier. The river would have gone over or around before the end of the battle. I will admit I also had that thought. Pedro Enrique saying Celebrimbor's actor chewed every scene he was in this episode. Yeah. So, and another thing I like to give credit when it's due. I think both Charlie's, the actors playing Sauron and Celebrimbor, I think they did fantastic in this episode. Really good, and they have been great all season. This is, for me, the highlight of the season has been their interactions. Those two. Let's go to Joe Magician saying, I'm trying to decide if I should watch this show. Sell me a note while not taking off your glasses more than twice. I'm going to leave this to the chat, Matt, to sell you on this. If you think that Matt, if you don't know Matt, by the way, I should just introduce Joe Magician, one of the finest A Song of Ice and Fire channels out there. Friend of the channel, has been on here many times. And I know, a big fan, not just of A Song of Ice and Fire, but also Tolkien. Do you think Matt should be watching Rings of Power? And if so, why? Put it in the chat and I'll read them out. Let's go to a question from Commander Ray. I theorize that Sauron is going to take the orcs back to Mordor in exchange for the Nine Rings. Sauron and Prince Durin have been my favorites of the season, especially how cleverly they have written the Great Deceiver. What characters have stood out for you this season? I can't believe Celebrimbor did such a terrible thing to Mardania, and she was to be so duly rewarded. Right. So first of all, in case you missed it, and there was a lot of this kind of stuff, when Mardania goes flying over that wall, yes, this was Celebrimbor saying, "Take your hands off me," kind of thing. But Sauron also did a little the hand motion. That was him pushing her off to make Celebrimbor look bad. So it wasn't Celebrimbor pushing her off. This was Sauron pushing her off that wall. As for who has stood or what has stood out for me, I don't think my views are any different to most people's views on this. I think that if you could just do a bottle episode or bottle series with Anatar and Celebrimbor, that worked really well. The episodes which have worked best for me have been the ones where it's just focused in on that dynamic. And I've said before, this isn't the way Tolkien wrote that story, but that was acted and written well enough that I took off my nerd hat and I didn't care. That bit worked really well. The feel was there of Sauron, this great deceiver, and how people could actually believe him. So that I really loved. I still adore the dwarves. I've got my concerns about what they done. I thought they did a fantastic job in season one. I think they kind of taken it down a notch or two in season two, but I still think Peter Mullen has done a fantastic job, in particular with Durin Senior, and then we get Durin and Disa. Fantastic. I loved the introduction of Na'vi. As a whole, Khazad-dûm looks amazing. So I still like that. Those are the bits that I'm biggest fan of. The rest hasn't worked as well for me, but a big step up, I would say. Okay, let's see what people think about whether or not Joe Magician should be watching this. Weirwood saying great acting, and watch it with one eye open and something to wring your hands on, says Sword of the Morning. Akatosh Ray saying, I would not. I just watched Robert's videos about it. I would do the same. The show, Paul Stargasm saying the show is perfectly fine by current standards if you can put the book aside. Nina Nylander saying just do it. It looks amazing on screen, says Kirsty Angel, but then sort of plummets everywhere else. Andrew K saying the writing is a bit better. Okay, so I think the general feeling here Gem Magician, plot twist, I've never read the Silmarillion because I ain't a nerd. Get out. No, that's fine. So many people have not read the Silmarillion. It's absolutely fine and it's not a problem. If you've read the appendices to The Lord of the Rings, that's what they got the rights to anyway. So that's what we're going with. The Hermit. Is Gandalf the only Istari mentioned in the Rings of Power? If so, what about the others? Um, so in the Rings of Power, they talk about Istar quite a lot. Uh, the Dark Wizard is apparently an Istar, but that's it. Um, the way that they sort of use the word is quite loose, so it's not 100% clear exactly who might be, whether there might be other Istari there. Um, Again, this isn't in Tolkien's Second Age chronology. None of his writings that we have Gandalf there in the Second Age. It doesn't mean he wasn't there, but it just means that Tolkien didn't write about him, and there's nothing to suggest he was there. Similarly, the Dark Wizard, who, I mean, if I had to guess, is Saruman, but we'll wait and see. The Blue Wizards, we had no mention of. Radagast, we've had no mention of. Miriel did get a name check, being the. I mean, she's technically not an Istad, but she is a. This is not Miriel that we know, but she was a Maya who married an elf way back in time, and she was with the original five way back before even the first age. I did a whole other video about that if you want. It's called something like Gandalf's Forgotten First Mission to Middle-earth. So there are various Maiar who are mentioned. Let's go to a question from Maura Lee. We are getting close to the end of season 2 of Rings of Power, the fall of Eregion and the making of the rings for men. When do you see Sauron forging the One Ring? Will that be in season 3? Well, I don't think they've left enough time for it to be done in season 2. So I think the implication is that, yes, this has to be in season 3. Now, because of the way that they've changed the order of all this around, then the forging of the ring is going to be different to the way that Tolkien did it, because when he went off and forged the One Ring and then put it on, nobody knew that that was going to happen. They didn't know that Sauron was around. They didn't know that he was trying to control them. That, given what's happened in the show, that is not possible anymore. So the manner in which the One Ring is forged is going to be completely different, which leaves a very small possibility that they might even say, well, he forged it in the past. That's a thing that they could do, but in terms, I don't think they will be able to get around, or would even be able to resist the forging of the One Ring. Surely you'd want to show the forging of the One Ring on your TV show that you spent so much money on. So I think it'll happen in season 3. It should happen. I mean, maybe they'll do the distribution of the 9, and then after that he forges the One Ring and claims control over the 9. I don't know. But yes, it will be almost certainly in season 3, I think. Um, duh, duh, duh. That's Vitamin J7 saying, I think the kiss was a distraction for that brooch handoff. So if you've seen it, you know what we mean by the kiss. Yes, it was. And I will admit, one of the occupational hazards of doing what I do means I was actually spoiled on that detail that that was about to happen, and I have to admit my my reaction when that I was told by this person was it in order to like do, I think I called it like what would happen in a James Bond film, where it's just a distraction so that he could pass over something so that she could get out of her chains. And a part of me is relieved that that's the case. Part of me is also a little bit disappointed that there wasn't a better reason. It's I didn't like it. I will happily say that I didn't like it. I think that they could have done the handing over of that little brooch thing so that she could escape without doing that. It just gets a little bit weird when you realise he's about to marry her daughter, and I don't know. So I didn't particularly like that bit, but yes, it was an attempt to distract away from him handing her the brooch that would allow her to then pick the lock so she could escape. Martin S. Finway's first wife, aka Fairnall's old lady, was named Miriel too. Yes, absolutely. And let's go to Rassler. How do you think the show will explain where Celeborn has been? Celeborn obviously being Galadriel's husband. Do you have any theory? Is he being held in some unknown jail by some unknown entity? And if he's free, why has he not returned? I mean, this is an excellent question. I think there's two options, because if he was around, she seems convinced he's dead. And if he was not dead and in Middle-earth somewhere, then he should have turned up at some point. So either he is captured, or he did die and he's going to return. Now, when I say he did die and he's going to return, elves are immortal. That doesn't mean that they can't be killed, but when they are killed, then they appear in the halls of Mandos, and they can they spend a time in kind of elf purgatory for a while before sort of being reincarnated, as it were, back in Valinor. Some elves are fast-tracked through that. For example, Glorfindel. In the first stage, he died in Middle-earth fighting a Balrog. He went to the Halls of Mandos, and he kind of got fast-tracked through that. And in the second age, got sent back to Middle-earth. Now, I suspect that's what they're going to do with Celeborn. And we've already been told that he will appear at some point in the show, as will Glorfindel. So perhaps the two of them will arrive on a boat, and it's like, surprise. So maybe that's what it is. What that means is that you have to remember with Galadriel that, and she did give a little speech, I think it's towards the end of season 1, about how she was married and her husband, she thinks he's dead, She doesn't think he's dead. She thinks she will see him again. She thinks she will be reunited with him again. If she actually and actively thinks he's dead, then in episode 1, whenever it was, when she was heading off on the boat to Valinor, she thought she was going back to see him again. So elves mate for life. They have one partner, and that is it. So she, in her heart, is still married to Celeborn, and he will return at some point. Perhaps it's a long shot. Perhaps he is captured somewhere, but I don't know who by, because Sauron's not been around for a period of time, which, I mean, I think the implication has to be it was quite a long time. He was that kind of like slug-like thing. But he couldn't have kept somebody captured for that long, and Adar there seems to be no hint that he's got any long-term prisoners. So yeah, I think probably he's dead and he's just going to return at some point in season 3. Let's go to was Fox in what are your thoughts about Adar being someone recognizable from the First Age? I've heard Maeglin and Maglor thrown out. I mean, I like this idea, but he's now spent a reasonable amount of time with Galadriel and a reasonable amount of time with Elrond, and at no point did Galadriel in particular go, you remind me of my cousin or whatever it would be. Um, she she never has gone like that. Elrond has not gone, aren't you such and such? That hasn't happened. Um, one assumes, yes, he is this corrupted elf, but he doesn't look that different from. I mean, he's got some scars and things, but presumably you can still see roughly what he used to look like. So my instinct is no. He's uh, he's not um, anybody in particular, and I think that they're going for that. He is just a random elf. It's not that he's a special person; he's a random elf, but he cares. Let's go for Torvus Corax saying, "Good evening, Robert and Dan. Orcs in the light of dawn. Did I miss something? What was the northern light that came with Vorahil, and why can the orcs fight in it? Or do the orcs bring the shadow as the others bring the cold?" Well, I don't think you missed anything, unless I also missed it. I think the orcs were indeed charging forward during daylight. They established quite clearly in season one these orcs. Um, uh, the skin burns in the daylight. That's why they created Mordor in the first place. And here, as dawn approached, they started charging forward and seemed to be able to fight without a problem. I, I suspect the in-show um, reasoning is that yes, you saw the first shards of light, but then there was so much burning and things going on that the cloud cover protected them. I suspect that's what the in-show argument was, but they didn't say that, and it wasn't 100% clear. But that's my best guess. Martin S. Do elf Maya marriages occur aside from Elweth slash Thingol and Melian? Any examples on a man? Well, no, this is the only marriage, sort of elf Maya marriage we're aware of. It has to be said, though, that we don't really know, other than the 5-6 Maiar that are specially focused in on Middle Earth. We don't know about many of them at all. When I say 5-6, that's from the good side. Obviously, we've got Sauron and the Balrog as well on the other side, but we don't hear of any other marriages between elves. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. The way that Tolkien explains it isn't. It's not like a massive shock. How on earth can that happen? It was just like, and they fell in love, and that was that. They're both immortal beings, so if anything, it's less of a shock than and less of a jarring thing than between an elf and a human, because that is that. How do you cope with the fact that one is immortal and the other will live a mortal life? Um, Fixer DK says, seems like Adar was in Menegoroth in Doriath, so he should know Galadriel. Yeah, they've not really gone down that detail. I think they've decided that they're not going to um, dig into exactly who he might be. That was certainly the implication, but they've not said that. I suspect that they've made a decision, which I completely understand why they might make that decision, that if they went too much into the detail of things that happened in the first age, first of all, they may or may not have all of the rights to that, and secondly, um, that would be losing the casual viewer. The important point for the casual viewer is the fact that here he is an elf who has been corrupted, and he remembers what it was like to be an elf. Vitamin J7, do you think Arondir is still alive? Yep. He's he's a central character to this. I think they would have focused a lot more on that if that actually was his end. 444. Hi, Robert. Over 20 years ago, I read a book called The Last Ringbearer, which recounts events of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings from Mordor's perspective. The premise of the book is that Mordor is not an evil empire, but a modern and industrializing nation who fights with feudal kingdoms opposing modernization. And everything we can read in The Lord of the Rings is actually just elven propaganda. I think it was the biggest attempt to humanizing orcs I have ever encountered. The second biggest attempt is The Rings of Power. Adar is probably the most interesting and most developed character of the show. Maybe the story around the dwarves is around the same level. Not sure why the writers did not apply at least as much dedication to other storylines. What are your thoughts? Well, I went down this route and talked about this quite a bit in season 1, but it's well worth, I think, reiterating it for season 2. For me, Adar is not only the best addition to the show that was not a specific Tolkien character that we have, but also one of the questions that are raised by him are some of the most Tolkienian questions that we have. Tolkien did not have a fixed. I've done videos on this if you want to go down this rabbit hole, but the headline is Tolkien did not have a fixed idea on what orcs were. Were they corrupted elves? Were they beasts that have been taught to talk? Were they corrupted humans? Were they some kind of mix of these different things? He went down, as was his way, he went down a really kind of theological route to try and understand. For him, it was very important that they could not be irredeemable. That was a thing he did not like, the idea. They were in this world, and because they were in this world and God created the world, then they could not be irredeemable. There had to be some potential, at least, for good in them. But what did that mean, therefore, in terms of what they actually were? Now, he went through his life, lots of different iterations of exactly what an orc is, and the kind of things we get hints of this. If you'll remember, there's in the Silmarillion, Christopher Tolkien picked one thing to highlight, which was this idea about corrupted elves, and then in the Lord of the Rings, you'll get Treebeard muttering about whether or not Saruman's orcs could be orcs mixed with humans in some way. You get lots of these different just flicks that of potential. Oh, that's an idea there. That's an idea there. What I really liked in season 1, or one of the things I really liked in season 1, was the fact that they actually grappled with this. They didn't just go the Peter Jackson route of saying, "Oh, orcs are all horrible and nasty, and let's not delve into it all that much." They created Adar as this kind of figurehead who was there speaking on their behalf to people like Galadriel. And if you remember, there was that scene where he's her prisoner and he's trying to say, these orcs, don't we deserve a homeland? That we're not all bad. And she's there going, yes, all orcs are terrible, they're evil. And that's a debate that Tolkien himself had. So the way that they introduced that as a concept, I thought was fantastic. It's not an attempt to kind of whitewash orcs and say orcs are actually okay and they're all happy and lovely. We shouldn't be looking at them in that way. Tolkien never thought that orcs were amazing and wonderful, but he also did not think they were irredeemable. and he struggled with this concept of what that might mean. And so I think the way that they've done it, they've not done it as well or as nuanced in season 2 as they did in season 1, but particularly in season 1 when they started talking about this subject, that the way they've handled it felt Tolkienian to me. Not all of Rings of Power has felt Tolkienian, but that did. Caius Ballerina, why is Gil-galad and his horse in nearly entirely gold armor? Does he want to die? I think he just wants to look good. I suspect this is one of those things where if you follow down that route as to why particular armor is like it is, they've not gone for gritty practical stuff. They've gone for what looks good, and so that's why he was wearing what he was wearing. Let's go to Carl Kosnak saying, as a Christian Catholic, Tolkien had to believe that even orcs could be redeemed or reborn in some way, but that doesn't mean they weren't also baddies due to their behavior. As always, Carl, you have summarized that better than I could. I waffled around that for like 5 minutes, but yeah, that's exactly right. Thank you. Let's go to. I've got some wider questions about the Lord of the Rings, but if you've got more questions about the Rings of Power, do feel free to drop them into the chat now. Rassler, I've seen a theory that the Witch King could be Isilmo. Is this the generally accepted theory amongst Tolkien scholars, or is it considered unlikely? Are there any other known people who are potential candidates? So Isilmo is a character in. He's not really mentioned much, but he appears there in the timelines. He's in Numenor, and he's part of the royal family. Now, the reason why some people say that is that I think it was the tabletop role playing game. It was one of the earlier. Semi-canon is probably the wrong way of saying it, but you know what I mean, kind of publications that actually listed who the some of the Nazgul were when they say this on. I think if you analyze it, the timelines don't quite work. Is that he would probably be well dead by the time the Nazgul appear. Are there any theories? That lots of people have theorized about this, but the fact is that Tolkien didn't flesh out a lot of characters for the kind of timescale that we're looking at in terms of the Nazgul. There are 9. 1 we know, Camul the Easterling. 3 are in Numenor, and the other 5 are presumably elsewhere in Middle Earth. So the ones that we've got the best chance of guessing at are in Numenor, but even there, he doesn't specify who it is. Let's go to Antonio Panzetta. How do elves feel about the death of other elves? Is it upsetting as it isn't natural to them, or are they relatively comforted knowing they're going to go to the halls of Mandos and will meet again in Valinor? Well, a bit of both. They are. I mean, death isn't. It doesn't. It isn't natural to elves. But yes, there is definitely this understanding that an elf doesn't die; they will go to the halls of Mandos. So the the point of the hang on, now, let me take one step. I was started trying to say something that I'll come at this from a slightly different angle. It isn't natural to them, but what is the most unnatural is the completely giving up on life. You get this. So Feanor's mother, for example, is the big example, and that happening in Valinor, in the Undying Lands. She gave birth to Feanor, and that took so much of her energy that she just didn't want to carry on. And that was like a proper death, to the extent that Finwë, Feanor's father, remarried, which is unheard of for elves, because his wife just said, "That's it, I'm giving up, I'm gone, no more." So there is such a thing as elf death, as it were, or elf giving up on existence. But just being killed, yeah, there's this very clear feeling that they will meet them again. Take Elrond, though, as an example. Elrond, his wife Celebrian died effectively and went off to took a boat over to Valinor, and he missed her hugely. And when Arwen chose a mortal life and he went off, he missed her as well. So it's not just a matter of, oh, are they mourning the dead? It's also a matter of, will they miss that person? And if they do, because going to the Halls of Mandos, it's not just like, oh, yeah, we'll just pop off there and we'll reappear. Then actually it takes time. Sometimes it seems to take hundreds, thousands of years, maybe. So they do miss people, and you get the lament when they sing the lament in Lothlorien for Gandalf. It's very clear that this is not just a random new thing that they might do for Gandalf. This is the lament they would sing for elves who have gone. So the sense of loss is perhaps, if anything, greater for them than it is for us humans, because if they've lived with somebody for thousands of years and then that person is not there, they would miss them. Martin S. I thought they would show Gil-galad dominating more in the fight. He'll be key to taking down Sauron in the War of the Last Alliance. Yeah, I mean, it was great to see him there. He had Aeglos, his spear, which was fantastic. I liked that. But yeah, he wasn't quite as impressive as I was kind of hoping, it has to be said. Gilio, did the White Council do anything to stop the Witch King from destroying Arnor? And what were the differences between Arnor and Gondor socio-economically? So, I mean, the White Council specifically, no. But the members of the White Council, yes. So Elrond did take part, leading forces up from Rivendell. Glorfindel also was a part of that. Obviously, he was based at Rivendell. So they did play a proactive part in opposing the Witch King. As for the differences between Arnor and Gondor socioeconomically, well, geographically, let's start geographically. So Gondor, we don't really think our image of Gondor is very much based on the Peter Jackson Gondor, where everybody was ready for war, wearing lots of clothes. It shouldn't be like that. This is a lot warmer climate. Down there, they have different plants and trees grow. This is a lot more Mediterranean kind of feel to it. Whereas Arnor up in the north is a lot more Northern European kind of feel. So when you're talking geography, the geography then impacts on the culture. So you will get Arnor is a lot more affected by the seasons, with the snow right to the north of Arnor is actually quite cold. Socioeconomically, they were very similar in as much as they both had this. The upper classes, at least, had this Numenorian heritage, and both of them, because they were sister kingdoms, both of them lived very much in the shadow of a lost kingdom and lost technologies. We see a lot more of that down in the south in Gondor, but the implication is that there was more to the north. Now, in terms of further differences, we're not shown much of Arnor. It has to be said, Tolkien didn't write huge amounts about that chunk of the Third Age while Arnor existed. So beyond that, we can't really say. But I will have a look into it. And if there is more, that's the kind of video that I love making. Antonio Panzetta saying, last week I asked you about how Sauron fell to Gil-galad and Elendil, and you said that he didn't. But everything I can find is that though Gil-galad and Elendil died in their battle with Sauron, they vanquished or overthrew him in the process. And then while Sauron was down, Isildur went and cut the ring from him. At least that's what Tolkien Gateway, etc. say. Are they wrong? Well, I can't remember what I said last week, and I would never wish to dispute such illustrious people as Tolkien Gateway. What I will do then is I will just literally read what it says in the Silmarillion. In my view, Tolkien left it a little bit open as to exactly how that happened. What we read is this. At the siege was so straight that Sauron himself came forth, and he wrestled with Gil-galad and Elendil, and they both were slain. And the sword of Elendil broke under him as he fell. But Sauron also was thrown down, and with the hilt shard of Narsil, Isildur cut the ruling ring from the hand of Sauron and took it for his own. So the way I read that, and others may read it slightly differently, is that he killed Gil-galad and Elendil, and they both were slain, and Elendil's sword broke under him as he fell. But in so doing, Sauron was thrown down. Now, what exactly thrown down means? Perhaps I don't think it means killed, personally, but I think it does mean sort of cast down in that battle, and that's the moment. And Isildur basically took the moment. So, pardon me. So, feel free to draw whatever kind of conclusions from that as you wish. But my take is that Sauron definitely killed both of them. He was not killed by it, but he was thrown down. Cast Ballerina, if we go with the Rings of Power orcs being elves and they could be cleansed or redeemed in the halls of Mandos, what would an uncorrupted orc Fëa look like? That's the soul or spirit in Tolkien's world. Would it still be an orc or an elf? Well, this is exactly the kind of thing that Tolkien was struggling with. And he also looked at what would happen if an orc was a corrupted elf, then he thought, yes, they probably should be going to the halls of Mandos. But could they be uncorrupted there? He grappled with a lot of these kind of issues. An uncorrupted orc Fëa, I think, if I'm understanding you correctly, what you're asking is if an orc was a corrupted elf and then went to Mandos and then sort of became uncorrupted, would their spirit or soul still be orcish, or would they be elf? And I think the answers on those grounds would be elf. But this is where Tolkien struggled. So I think if he struggled, then I think that we're allowed to also struggle. Ms. Fox in Arda. Hi, Robert and Dan. Hello. It's been awesome to see Matt from Nerd of the Rings. We had a different Matt on here earlier, but it's been awesome to see Matt from Nerd of the Rings in the stream the last few weeks. Amazing to have my favorite Tolkien creators in the same space. Question. During the events of Lord of the Rings, we know that Sauron can take a form, as Gollum recalls his hand. Why does he not show himself for the entirety of the War of the Ring? I think it's creepy to have the villain hidden, but wouldn't it help his Nazgul in their various errands if a form of Sauron was running about distracting people? Was he saving it for when he eventually obtained the ring? So he was not in control. So when you say he could take a form, yes, but he was not in control of the form that he took. He to appear as as he was, basically as his as his soul, his spirit was. So he had to appear as this kind of Dark Lord. But the implication is that an almost broken and defeated Dark Lord in many ways. He's got we know he's got 4 fingers in one hand. He could not, even in his new body, he could not regenerate another finger, one finger which was cut off because the ring was taken from him. So that's the kind of the implication, is that his body is not great. It's not him appearing as this magnificent Maya. It's not him appearing in fair form. He is horrible to look at and probably not physically that impressive or imposing. Class Ballerina, pick up a question for Flixer DK. Thank you so much. I love it when people do this, pick up questions for other people. Do you think Tar Kiritan and Tar Atanamir had rings of power? Maybe even Tar Minister? It seems like he was the first king not to give up his throne willingly. My instinct is no. For those who don't know about sort of the way that the Numenorians, the High Numenorians, Numenorian kings in particular, they live very long lives, so 200-300 years, and the way that it worked was not that they were kings until they died and then their heir took over. They were kings until they realized that their years of vigor were gone, and then they voluntarily handed over the kingship to their heir. That was the way that it should go. So they would live 200 years, whatever. Then the moment would come upon them when they'd realize, in this kind of insightful, wise way, my time has gone. It's now time for somebody else. And then they would pass this on to someone else, and they would live out the last few years of their life just in quiet retirement somewhere. And this was a show, a very Tolkienian kind of show of how good and right it was. There wasn't a desire to hold on to power. It was a desire, now my time is done and I'm passing this on to someone else. And that is held up in opposition to what happened towards the end of Numenor's time, where kings did not willingly hand over power. They carried on being king right up until the very, or queen, right up until the very moment of their death. And this plays into the kind of the meta idea of them raging, the Numenorians raging against the concept of death. When the elves seem to be immortal, why do humans have to die? So that's the kind of feeling we've got there. As a result, I know some people have wondered whether some of the kings could have possibly become Nazgul. I think the implication has to be a king dies and you bury a king, not, then Tolkien never wrote about a king who suddenly just like lived an extraordinarily long life and then eventually faded and became a wraith. That I think he would have written about. So as much as I like this idea, it's much more likely to be, when we were talking a little bit ago about another potential candidate, the one thing I think that does have in its favor is it's much more likely to be somebody in the wider family. So if you were to go to Rings of Power, for example, then they shouldn't make Falazon one of the Nazgul, but Kemen, his son, that would work perfectly. Let's go to a question from Lady Vaughan Strauss. Until recently, I was under the impression that despite not being his choice, shuffling off his mortal coil was a bit of a windfall for Sauron. It seemed to me that having no corporeal form would be beneficial to be a wannabe omnipotent being, but evidently not. So how does lacking a soul cage dilute Sauron's power and ability to complete his goal? Well, it's not just lacking a soul cage, it's that you're not connected to the world. You're not grounded in the corporeal world. So that's the idea, and so you cannot affect personally yourself. You cannot affect things. So when he did not have a corporeal form, he could not manipulate things around him. Now, yes, he could therefore be sort of on the winds and sort of magically influencing things and stuff like that. But the idea is very much when you see Saruman at the very end of Lord of the Rings, his body is killed and it's his spirit sort of comes up and then he's just sort of blown away. And that's the feel we've got or should have with Sauron, is that he's not in control anymore. He's now the whims of this world and he is not grounded in the world. He could just be sort of washed away, blown away, and that's the kind of feel we got. Which, incidentally, with the Nazgul, we get this just as a more sort of grounded idea. The Nazgul, it's very clear that they had gone into wraith form, but they were bound to this world through the ring magic. So their wraith forms had been bound to this world. And the magic that was in Merry's sword when he stabbed the Witch King, that severed that bond between the wraith form and the world. And that's what allowed Eowyn to kill him effectively. So that's what the idea was, and so you get this wonderful description if you read it when the Witch King dies, and it's almost like he kind of squeals off into the distance, and then you just get the echo of a scream, and the spiritual form that was there is no longer, because the bond between that and the real world has been broken. And Lady Von Strauss saying, I'm curious about wizards and their staffs, but specifically Gandalf's. When Saruman takes Gandalf's staff, Gandalf returns from his imprisonment with his new staff, absent the stone, until he suddenly needs a light in Moria, and then he pops one back in like it's a torch. Does the stone in a wizard's staff serve any greater function? Considering Gandalf killed the Balrog using a sword, for example, how important or powerful is the staff to the wizard beyond dramatic affectation and symbolism? Thank you. Well, symbolism is definitely a big part of it. There are hints that there's something more going on. When Gandalf basically takes control, he's Gandalf the White, and he confronts Saruman. He says, Saruman, your staff is broken, and Saruman's staff is broken. And that's symbolically getting rid of his magic. And it's very clear from that moment on, he doesn't have his magic anymore. So there is something that is more than just a nice symbol. There is some kind of connection. And Tolkien, obviously, as we always say, had a notoriously soft magic system. He didn't tell us, all the details of what's going on. But Grima clearly thought it important that Gandalf was not allowed access to his staff. It seems to be something that allows them to be doing their magic. But unless it's broken in a symbolic way, you can just get another one. Seems to be the implication, because Gandalf went through, 3 different staffs while he was in Middle-earth, so it's not that the staff itself is the specific thing. Martin S. When hypothesized that orcs are corrupted elves, corrupted in that sense, context means twisted by Melkor's powers, is my take, rather than being turned in the direction of evil in general. Thoughts? Yes, I think that's right. When Tolkien was grappling with this, it was very much this idea. So Morgoth could not create from nothing an orc. So he had to start with something. And the way he did that was to take an elf and then the language, I can't remember the exact language used, but if you read the Silmarillion, the kind of feel is he went down into his dark laboratory and he just did magic, horrific things on them and turned and twisted them to become, in this kind of Frankenstein way, to become what he wanted them to be. And that's the kind of feel we've got. So it's not just now you're evil. It's actually it's a mockery is what he was going for. He was trying to create something which was mocking elves. So it was close enough to an elf that everyone could look at it and go, oh, yeah, I see what you're doing there. But in the way that elves are beautiful and lithe and graceful, orcs are not. Let's go to actually, I think that's my Lord of the Rings questions done as well. So I've got we've got a fewer questions this week than we often do, but we've got some Song of Ice and Fire questions. Please do keep coming with the Lord of the Rings questions. I'll try and pick them up as I can. William Schneider. A Game of Thrones question. Is the magic that Mirri Maz Dur uses the same as what Melisandre uses? And did the sacrifices of Khal Drogo, their son, and Mirri Maz Dur herself help hatch the dragons? Were they both similar king sacrifices to power up the spell? So to pick up on the second half of that, the the magic that happened to make Dany's dragons hatch was George R. Martin has very clearly said this was a one-off. This was magical. This was unique. The exact right set of circumstances happened. Now, we can look at the ingredients of that. The red comet is overhead. There's fire, there's blood, there's sacrifices, there's intention on Dany's part. But exactly what mix that is, he doesn't want us to know. It's clear, though, that we have 3 dragon eggs and we have 3 sacrifices, as it were. Khal Drogo himself, who was the mightiest Khal in all of Westeros. He was effectively a king. We had Rhaego, who is his Drogo and Dany's son, or would have been their son. And the prophecy was that he was the stallion that mounts the world. He was going to be even greater. And then we also get Mirri Maz Dur, who may not be royalty herself, but she's a magician. So this is a great sacrifice as well. Now, those 3 sacrifices allowed the 3 dragon eggs to hatch. As I say, George R. Martin doesn't want us to know the exact formula, but yes, that kind of sacrifice is needed. Almost all magic in George R. Martin's world does obey this idea that you have to have some sort of a sacrifice to make magic work. As for the first part of your question, is it the same kind of magic that Melisandre uses? I suspect, for the most part, Melisandre would say no, in as much as she says that her magic is coming from the Red God. But the more, and I've said for years, at some point I'll do a big video about how magic works in the Song of Ice and Fire. But the more you get into it, the more you think this is kind of all it feels like it's all tying together, and you might be tapping into it in different ways. House of the Dragon, definitely season 2, they were definitely kind of trying to go down this route where you have the Weirwood, tapping into the Weirwood network seems to be able to cross over, coincide with Helena, with her Dragon Dream magic, which we'd not really seen before like that. And that seems to go together. So the implication is that magic out there does seem to be connected. And so whereas Miri Mazdur, both of them seem to have been to a shy to learn some magic, but whereas Miri Mazdur probably herself thinks that she's learned some skills how to be magical, Melisandre certainly seems to believe that her magic comes from her faith in God, or from God, and it's her faith that allows her to do the magic. So they believe it's different things. They may or may not be right. Karis Ballerina, picking up a question for Sword of the Morning. Do you think that Celebrimbor talking to Galadriel of light as hope is why she gives the light to Samwise? Yeah, I mean, it's a nice little speech from Celebrimbor. They may well be thinking that is probably my answer to that. One of the things the Rings of Power have done a lot of is to try to seed what happens in the Lord of the Rings in the Rings of Power, in terms of stuff that people say. They remember thousands of years later and say it again in the Lord of the Rings, or it is said, or more often, stuff that is said to somebody, they then say later themselves. So it's like, oh, you're seeing why they came up with that idea. For example, when Galadriel, back in episode 2 or whatever it was, when she's like swimming and she reaches the raft, and then Halbrand is like, no, hang on a moment. He says a few things to her, like the tides of fate are turning, or something along those lines. And that is what she says later to the Fellowship when they arrive. And another couple of things he says to her are things that she says in The Lord of the Rings. And then you get Tom Bombadil, who just an episode or two ago, he talks to Gandalf about, many of those who deserve life die, kind of thing, and Gandalf seems to have turned that round in his head, and he says that's to Frodo in The Lord of the Rings thousands of years later. So they've done this a lot. They've tried to show where people got their ideas for things from, that happen in The Lord of the Rings much later. Personally, I don't mind one or two of those things. I think they're now at the point of slightly overdoing it, where I just want people to be having original thoughts. Then not everything has to be coming from somebody saying it to them. And I like the idea that Galadriel and Gandalf can come up with wise things on their own without having people say it to them. But in that context, the idea that what Celebrimbor is talking to Galadriel about light might then impact what she says later about providing a light and darkness. It definitely had echoes of that. So I think that probably is what they were doing, yeah. Let's go to Diego Godoy saying, Hola, Robert. Hola to you. Now that House of the Dragon Season 2 is finished and looking ahead to the Duncan Egg TV show, what are you most looking forward to see in the TV adaptation of those stories? For me, it's Baelor Breakspear. It may be a bit early, but any plans on how you'll cover the pre-season to the release? Well, if you missed the update, they have finished filming A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. So we're now in post-production. They finished filming a week or two ago, something along those lines. We're looking at 2025, so next year. They're not going to sit on it for ages, so expect it spring or summer next year. To kind of tide us over, the plan certainly for this next couple of years seems to be that's happening next year, and then the year after that we'll have House of the Dragon again. So we get content every year. How will I cover it? I haven't decided yet. I have to admit. I mean, I'd be fascinated if you let me know. If you're watching this back a bit later, down in the comments afterwards, or if you're watching this live in the chat, what do you actually enjoy in terms of coverage? I've noticed certainly in the um, House of the Dragon season 2 that the breakdown videos didn't seem to get as many views as they have done previously. Not just me. I think that was across the piece. Does that mean people don't like them as much? Do they want explainers on characters? What works for you? Do you want explainers on the world at the time? Who these characters are going to be? The themes? Just let me know. I'll be fascinated. So I'm a long way. I've not really started engaging my brain with how I'm going to cover it, but I'd love to know what you think. In terms of characters I'm looking forward to, for season 1, which is basically the Hedge Knight, the story of the Hedge Knight, I'm well, the boring answer is I'm really looking forward to Duncan Egg themselves as characters because they're so fantastic. But leaving them to one side, I I can't wait to see Darren the Drunken. It has to be said, and Arian. One a kind of a line that I read it a year or so ago. I can remember I was talking about it on a stream where I'd obviously read it before, but it really hit home was when Maester Aemon is talking about he had 3 brothers who all had dragon dreams, and those dreams killed them. Feels like a throwaway line, but then suddenly you think we're going to see these characters, and we kind of think we know how Arian died because of dragon dreams. We can kind of figure that one out. We kind of know about Egg as well. We know that Darren was a dragon dreamer, but how did that kill him? So that's just dynamic. I'm just fascinated to see. Now they've opened up this idea about dragon dreamers being a lot more prevalent than perhaps we thought a little while ago. What are they going to show us? Are they going to show us a little bit more? Because this is the most magical age. Forget the dragons. Once the dragons have gone, this is the most magical era in Targaryen history, really. You've got this whole generation of dragon dreamers. We've got Bloodraven, who's magical. We've got Shira Seastar, who's magical. We've got Aerys the First, who was fascinated by studying these ancient mysteries. This should be, we think of it as being not a particularly magical series, but it should be lurking in the background all the way through this. So yeah, the characters I'm looking for is the Targaryens as much as anything else, and as much as Bael Breakspear will be fantastic. It's Egg's immediate family that I'm most interested in. Andrew K saying that's an underrated aspect of Duncan Egg. There's so many iconic, awesome characters woven through those stories. Yes, absolutely. Lady Von Strauss saying, I love the character, place, and object breakdowns, swords, trees, castles, histories, whatever you have. And yeah, and Andrew K saying Egg and basically all his siblings seem prophetically in the know as well. Long form content, I love the breakdowns, says Shelley Love. This is people saying about what kind of coverage to do when Duncan Egg comes around. Yeah, so I think, okay, I'm just flicking through. That's the Lunar Cascade saying, what type of magic practitioner is Quaithe? Where is she from? Do her prophecies help Dany? I'm going to redo my Quaithe video at some point soon. I am still very much of the opinion that Quaithe is Shira Seastar. I think there is, and I'll get into it in that video, but the imagery is there, the star imagery is there, and I think the main thing you have to look for with Quaithe is, what does she want? She's fascinated. She wants to see dragons to start with, and then she's just focused on Danny. And what does she want? What are the visions, the thoughts she puts in Danny's mind all this time? And there are two big thoughts that go through all of this. There's kind of like trying to guide her in different places, but the first big thought is, don't trust anyone. Don't trust the perfume seneschal. Don't trust this. Don't trust that. Trust yourself, just you. And then the second is, remember who you are. The dragons know who you are. Remember, you're a Targaryen, fire and blood. And whoever Quaithe is wanting Danny to be her full Targaryen self, not trust in all of these other voices around her telling her to settle down and rule in foreign lands somewhere over in Essos. She should be a dragon rider. She should be invading Westeros. That's what Quaithe is about. And that strikes me as the kind of thing that Shira Seastar would do. I made a connection since I made my video. I've taken it down, but I'm going to put it back up, as I say, at some point quite soon with a bit extra, because I made a link. I don't know when this was, maybe a year or so ago, which is that when Egg is planning for what happens at Summerhall, he is trying to get knowledge of how to hatch dragon eggs. And we're told that he sends for pyromancers from a shy, which is fascinating. But who would he send to a shy in order to try and get these pyromancers? And you have to say, who would he try? I mean, he could obviously just send like a rando person, but ideally you would want somebody who you can trust and somebody who would know what a proper magic user looks like. So you're not just getting some chancers coming out, people who actually know this kind of thing. And who is the perfect person there? Shira Seastar, who is around at this point. And Shira Seastar just vanishes from the narrative. We don't know what happens to her. We know what happens to Bloodraven. We know what happens to Daemon Blackfire. We know what happens to Bittersteel. We don't know what happens to Shira Seastar. So she disappears somewhere. I wonder whether he sent her over to a shy, and she stayed. And she became Quaithe and then came back into the story that way. So we're told that she was, she did a huge amount of things, but she was a magic user. She kept youthful looks, so she defies her age. And I think that there would be an incredible story echo to the idea that Bloodraven stayed in Westeros and identifies Jon Snow as being the prince that was promised. Here's the hero that we need in this fight against the others. And Shira Seastar goes to Essos and identifies Danny as being Azor Ahai Reborn, the hero that we need to save us against the others. And so these two lovers have separated and want the same thing, to find this hero. And they're in different continents and have found different heroes. I think that's the kind of sort of dynamic that George R. R. Martin would love to write about, in my view. And question from Michelle Raimo saying, do you think the Duncan Egg show will show peaks of Bloodraven as early as season, or pictures of Bloodraven as early as season 1, since he's such a favourite in the fandom? Maybe the Blackfire Rebellion flashbacks? Possibly. I mean, I don't know. I would like the idea that they do. But it should just be kind of flashbacks, because he is such a figure that everybody knows that it's he should at least get a mention somewhere along the line. He doesn't in the book. He's not there. We only really people talk a lot about him in book 2, and then in book 3 or story 3, he actually finally appears. So I think that they should, if they're looking to be doing this for more than one season, then they should start to sow those seeds of mentioning Bloodraven so people are aware of him. Let's go to Andrew K saying Quaith also has a ton of star imagery, which adds to the Shira links. Mask of starlight, stars around her hands, and whispers of stars, etc. Yes. And let's go to a question from Commander Ray. I wanted to ask how far you are through on your listening of A Feast for Crows. I've been going through it myself and have quite the amount of notes now. My second question is, has your slow going through Feast changed any opinions on characters or events? For myself, I've become much more interested in the Dornish POV chapters and the action there. Yes, so for those who don't know, I'm going on a very slow reread / re-listen all the way through A Song of Ice and Fire. I mean, I'm reading bits and stuff all the time, but this is very kind of intentional. I'm doing one chapter at a time. I'm listening to it. I'm trying to understand how each chapter is working on its own. I paused on my re-listen for House of the Dragon and The Rings of Power, so I'll pick up on it again in a couple of weeks' time. But I think, like you, the thing which has come out most is the Dornish plot, and the Sand Snakes and their individual motivations. It's very easy to just think of the Sand Snakes as a whole. It's just like, here's a whole bunch of people who want revenge, but that's not how they're written. You get the first chapter when we're introduced to Doran. He meets 3 of them, one after another, and they're all slightly different, and they've got slightly different ideas about how they all want revenge in some way, but they've got slightly different ideas about how they're doing it. And so Doran himself is kind of juggling these different things and trying to hold people back and move them, or in fact not even move them, but the clear implication is that what he is trying to do is just trying to push people in the right direction. I can point them in the right direction and say, now you go off and do your thing. Now you can go off and do your thing, but you can't do it just yet. Just hold back, and now you can go off and do it. That's the kind of feel I've got, is that, so that has shifted Doran in my mind away from somebody who's got like this grand plan, and it's actually more managing individuals. Well, it's probably going to be a bit of a shorter stream than normal because I've only got a couple more questions. But now is the time. I'm always trying to make a moment during the streams. If you're watching this live, could you just do me a favor and give a little bit of love to the moderators who do a fantastic job here? If you're in the chat, the reason why it's such a wonderful, fun, uplifting place without lots of bots attacking, without hopefully many sort of ad hominem attacks or anything like that, is because the moderators do a fantastic job. So thank you, moderators, from me. And if you're there in the chat, could you please thank them as well? I would hugely appreciate it. And also from me, patrons, thank you. I hugely appreciate you. If you do wish to support this channel, the best way to do that is through Patreon. There's a link down in the description. Okay, a couple more questions, and I'll go into the chat. Lady Pushkins, Money Unlimited, what would you have bought from the recent Game of Thrones auction? Yeah, if you missed this, it's not in the past tense. I think it's still going on. There is an auction online, and you can probably Google this and find it. There's an auction online of what I think they call Game of Thrones memorabilia, but basically it's props. And when you're sort of saying money, no objects, this is it. Most of these are quite expensive. As in, the cheapest thing I've seen on there, I've sort of flicked through a few things, but the cheapest thing I've seen is going for about $500. So it's not that you can just sort of quickly nip in and grab yourself a $5 prop. They're all going for a reasonable amount of money. I think the most expensive I saw, and certainly over 10,000, probably over 20,000, was one of Danny's dragon eggs. So there are some really impressive things. What if I could pick one? I think I really liked when I was flicking through the proclamation that Robert Baratheon um, uh, just said, that made Ned protector of the realm, and Ned was writing it down, and then Robert Baratheon signed it at the bottom. I think that would be a fantastic. I mean, imagine having that just up on your wall. That absolutely fantastic. So yeah, money no object. I think I would love that. I suspect it might be a bit harder trying to get one of the Valyrian steel swords through customs delivered to me over here, but yeah, that would also be quite cool. But if anyone does get any of those things, do let me know, because I'd be absolutely fascinated. Catherine Versith, my last question over on from my patrons, saying, "Hi Robert, if George R. R. Martin never finishes A Song of Ice and Fire, do you think a podcaster like you will sit down 50 or 60 years from now discussing and dissecting his work the way we now and possibly then will do with Tolkien? So will we still be talking about it in 50 or 60 years?" I think the answer is yes. I think the debates about how it would have ended, I think, would be endless. I think it's more likely that we'll have people discussing these things if we do not get an official ending. We've already got, I think, this next, but The Winds of Winter, even for whatever reason he stopped writing now, we're most of the way through The Winds of Winter. So I think that could be published and we could have some kind of understanding about what was going to happen there. But A Dream of Spring, because he has said so many times he's a Gardner writer, and yes, he's got an idea about what will happen at the end of the story, but he's not plotted it all out. It will always be slightly elusive exactly what would have happened. And yeah, I think we wouldn't resist being able to talk about it. The whether it gets to the same level as it is with Tolkien, where Tolkien, we have multiple professors of Tolkien, whether we would ever get the same way there with George R. R. Martin, I do not know. But definitely people will still be talking about this for a long time to come. Caius Ballerina. Charlie Vickers says that Sauron wants to do things differently from Morgoth with a more positive end. What does a positive end look like to him? What does he want to do with his power other than to just have it? Yeah, I did. I didn't read the entire quote, but I read that little bit. So Charlie Vickers, the actor who's playing Sauron in The Rings of Power, he did say that Sauron wants to use it for a positive end, or what he thinks is a positive end. And he kind of goes on to talk about what he saw with Morgoth was that if Morgoth couldn't control something, then he would just destroy it. And Sauron was there thinking that he could do it in a different way, and he could take control and heal things. Now, in the books, Tolkien is very clear in the Legendarium. Sauron isn't just this kind of like two-dimensional bad guy. He genuinely thinks that the Valar have abandoned Middle-earth, and he is the only person who can heal Middle-earth and make it orderly. He thinks it has to be ordered, and he thinks he's the person who can do this. And the evil flows from that he because he therefore thinks that he either has to, anyone who opposes him is just getting in the way of making the world better, and he has to control things, and then that has to be more just absolute control, not just allowing anyone any freedom. So it all flows out from that idea. So I was actually quite heartened by that. I don't think I agreed with all of the nuances of his interpretation, but it was enough for me to know that he'd actually investigated and thought about this character and thought about what this character was trying to do, because it would be very easy to just play Sauron, as I say, just as this two-dimensional villain. But actually, he thinks he's in the right. Everyone is a hero in their own story, as the saying goes. And Sauron thinks that he's in the right. He thinks that he can bring peace to Middle-earth. He thinks that he can order Middle-earth and nobody else can do it. So that's what he then, and people are stopping him doing it. And this is why he has to control them with these rings. So that's the kind of the feeling that's going on there. And I think the actor, I was quite impressed that he had worked his way through that and he'd come to this conclusion. I think that's all my questions from my patrons. So let's have a quick flick through the chat. Talking about looks like Valyrian steel, and saying that the props, there could have been swirly but not Damascus steel, because the art of making true Damascus steel has been lost. Absolutely. And there we can go. You can get Samuel V saying you can get Jon Snow's Night's Watch fit for $10,000 and it's not even black anymore. Oh, that's a shame. And Andrew Kay talking about magic earlier. For me, it adds to the intrigue and mystery of the universe when George R. Martin includes wider, even lesser explained magic like Miris or the sorcerer with Varys, etc. Yeah, I would agree completely. It's George R. Martin, he talks very eloquently about why he doesn't want to explain how magic works. In his mind, the moment you can have this hard magic system where you say, in order to do magic, you have to do X, Y, and Z, that almost turns it into a science, and it takes away the mystery, and that takes away the fear, because the fear behind magic is that you do not know what someone can do. You do not know what powers somebody could have. You do not know what they're planning. You do not know what they might do if they twist their hand or they throw something into a cauldron and stir it. You do not understand that. And that is where he thinks the fear comes from. He thinks we should be fearing magic. And the moment you say, or make it very clear and abundant that, oh, if you throw these ingredients into there, you get a potion of whatever, that suddenly means that you're not scared of it anymore. So, and he loves writing horror, George R. Martin. So that kind of idea should be there. We should be looking at Melisandre and be slightly uncertain what exactly she's going to do, because we don't know exactly what she can do. A train surfer saying, we know where House of the Dragon season 3 will start due to the foreshortening of season 2, but where do you think it will end? Well, this is a good question. So I think they're still writing it. Let's not go down the rabbit hole of the impact of George R. R. Martin's comments on that. But it will be starting with the fall of King's Landing. I've said for a long time, if I were writing this, then season 3 would be up to the second fall of King's Landing. That works for me as a kind of a narrative arc, that you go from, Rhaenyra takes over King's Landing. Hooray! She's there where on the throne where she's always wanted to be. But it ends, the arc of that season ends with her basically being hounded out. That for me works really well. Otherwise, they have to have another season-long arc, which is what. So you can potentially, you could have one with Daemon leading up to the battle over the God's Eye Lake. You could potentially do that, but you have to have some sort of an arc for Rhaenyra, who is going to take King's Landing, and then what? Where else might you end it? You could end it, I guess, in the Storming of the Dragon Pit, and then start season 4 with her fleeing afterwards. But it's somewhere around that kind of period. Gilio saying, what does Illyrion Vallis hope to get out of putting Fagon and Dany by marriage on the Iron Throne? Is it just the possible Blackfire connection? What do they want? Well, I've got videos coming out on this, so keep an eye out for them at some point in the next couple of months or so, I guess. But yeah, they want their man on the throne, is the short answer. And Varys is, I did a character study of Varys video, but he is a complex character, and he's not perfect, but the implication is that he does, having sort of sat there and watched some terrible rulers of the Seven Kingdoms, he does genuinely want a good ruler for the Seven Kingdoms. So that's the other thing. They could have, with the whole plan with Fagon, they didn't have to educate, they didn't have to show him the lives of the small folk. They didn't have to educate him. They could have just trained him to be a great soldier. But they actually went through the whole process of trying to teach him history, trying to teach him law, trying to teach him to have empathy for the small folk. So I think we have to give them at least a touch of credit to the idea that they might want a good and competent leader on the Iron Throne. And they want it to be their person. So that's the win for them as much as anything else. And I think with that, I will start to draw this one to a close. What we have got coming up, what video have I got? I always forget what video I've got coming up tomorrow. Lord of the Rings video coming up tomorrow will be just an explanation. Why did Frodo have to leave Middle-earth at the end of it? I mean, I think we kind of instinctively understand, but why did he have to go? Why couldn't he just stay in Bag End? So we've got that coming up over on the Well Told Tale. We're due to be shortly starting a new story, a new H.G. Wells story, The First Men in the Moon, which is fantastic. And I've got various other videos coming out on the main channel. So I think that's it. I will be back next week. We've got one more of these open Q&A where we're going to be thinking a lot about the Rings of Power. And then if you are a patron, $10 plus patron, do go over to Patreon and have a look. I've asked a question about what we should be covering in these streams after this. So do go and let me know in there what you think. But that is all for this time. If you are watching this back a little bit later, appearing somewhere around here is going to be a link to other live streams that I've done. Appearing somewhere around here is going to be a link to my Patreon, which is the best way to support this channel if you wish to do so. That is all for this time. I'll be back same time next week. Take care, everyone.